Before the sun broke the horizon, the swamps of South Carolina trembled with an unnatural silence. A fog rolled low, curling over rice fields heavy with dew. The church bell tolled once, then again, its echo shivering through the trees. From the shadows, firelight licked the sky, a farmhouse ablaze, roof collapsing in sparks. The smell of smoke mingled with iron blood. Somewhere in the dark, a drum thudded, a rhythm older than the land itself. A shadow stood against the flames, blade dripping. He did not run. He did not beg. At dawn, 30 masters would lie dead. The year was 1739. South Carolina's plantations spread wide and choking, their rice fields glistening like mirrors under the sun. The air was thick with humidity, buzzing with mosquitoes, and the smell of sweat and damp straw never left the skin. Men and women bent double in the fields, chained to labor from sunrise to dusk. White overseers watched from horseback, whips curling like snakes through the air. In a small tavern near the road, Samuel Wallace tapped a dirty coin on the table. He was a heavy man. His cheeks flushed pink from the ale he brewed stronger than law allowed. He leaned forward, whispering to a trader passing through. "They say the drums don't stop at night anymore," Samuel muttered. "Strange rhythms. Not church hymns, no. Something older. Something wild." The trader frowned. "Drums, what for?" Samuel shrugged, swallowing from his mug. "Maybe it's just noise. Or maybe they're calling to something. You don't spend 30 years in these swamps without learning. The slaves carry secrets in their songs." Outside, the church bell rang sharp, cutting the air. The sound came from Anne Clark, the widow who rang it each dawn. She was tall, gaunt, wrapped in mourning black, though her husband had been dead 5 years. Her hands smelled of iron and smoke from keeping her hearth alive through lonely nights. She lowered the rope and paused, staring across the mist. Beyond the field, she swore she saw a line of figures moving in the fog. Too many for workers at this hour, their shapes silent, purposeful. Anne's lips tightened. "God keep us," she whispered, crossing herself before stepping back into the chapel. By evening, whispers crept into every corner of the colony. The governor's men muttered of Spanish offers of freedom in Florida, a dangerous lure. Priests from St. Augustine were said to baptize runaways, granting them land and liberty under Spain's flag. For masters, it was treachery. For the enslaved, it was a beacon in the dark. In the quarters far from White Ears, the murmurs spread faster. By candlelight, slaves hummed to one another, voices weaving words into riddles only they understood. A lullaby became a message. A rhythm tapped on the wall became a signal. That night, Samuel Wallace staggered out of his tavern drunk, head swimming. He stopped at the edge of the swamp, the moon silver above him. From deep within the trees he heard it, a drum, low, steady like a heartbeat. Then another joined. Then another. Samuel's mug slipped from his hand and shattered on the stones. He staggered backward, mouth dry. "Lord save us," he whispered. "They're gathering." And far away in the hush of the quarters, chains rattled, not in bondage but in secret practice. The storm had not yet broken, but the air was charged. The quarters were little more than wood and mud, roofs patched with moss, floors beaten earth. At night, smoke from fire pits clung to the air, stinging the eyes, heavy with the smell of salted fish and boiled rice. Children whispered under thin blankets, their lullabies carrying the weight of another world. It was here that Jemmy stood apart. Tall, broad-shouldered, his skin darker than night, his gaze sharp as steel. Across his back stretched a lattice of scars, old whip lines crossing like rivers on a map. Some said you could trace the story of his life across that skin, captured in Angola. Shipped like cargo, beaten into silence, yet never broken. Jemmy kept close to Cuffy, a man smaller but sturdy, with scarred palms rough from shackles. Cuffy's laugh was rare, but when it came, it was warm enough to soften even the hardest evening. He followed Jemmy not as a servant, but as a brother, bound by suffering and survival. One night by the fire, Cuffy turned to him. "You don't sleep, why?" Jemmy's voice was low, deliberate. "Because I see chains even when my eyes are closed." Behind them, rocking slow in the shadows, sat Mama Nancy. Her hair was silver. Her voice cracked but deep, and her hands always busy weaving palm fibers into ropes no one dared question. When children cried, she sang lullabies, but each note carried memories of Africa, an echo of rivers, drums, and gods the whites could never erase. She leaned toward Jemmy, eyes gleaming like dying coals. They think chains bind the body, but chains rust. Songs do not. Jemmy turned his head. Songs won't break whips. Maybe not, Mama Nancy replied, her voice steady. But they remind us we are more than whips. That night, Jemmy lay on the dirt floor, listening to the night wind. From outside came the crack of the overseer's whip and the grunt of oxen in the fields. Though work was long finished, a boy coughed in the next hut, weak, fevered. Jemmy clenched his fists, rage curling through him like fire. Cuffy whispered in the dark, "You'll get yourself killed if you keep staring at them like that." "Better to die staring," Jemmy murmured, "than to live crawling." The words hung in the silence, heavy, dangerous. In the weeks that followed, Jemmy watched, listened. He learned more from silence than from speech, who sneaked food to the hungry, who whispered prayers, who carried hate in their eyes. He carried these names in his heart, a ledger of the willing and the broken. And always at night, Mama Nancy's lullabies wound through the air. To the masters, they were meaningless hums. To the enslaved, they were memory and promise. "Sleep, little bird," she sang, "for dawn will come with fire." The children drifted into dreams. Jemmy stayed awake, staring at the stars beyond the smoke. And in his silence, the fire was already lit. The field swayed with rice, waist deep in water, stalks sharp enough to cut bare skin. The air reeked of rot and clouds of gnats bit at every limb. Overseers rode the banks, whips coiled like serpents. At the head of them all was Thomas Calhoun. He was not the wealthiest planter nor the sharpest, but he was cruel with a precision that made cruelty an art. He drank whiskey at dawn and his lips were always wet with it, so that when he barked orders, his words dripped sour. His leather boots were polished, though the mud never left them. Calhoun reined his horse before Jemmy and Cuffy, narrowing his eyes. "Lift your heads. I like to see a man's face when he breaks." Cuffy kept his gaze low, jaw tight. Jemmy met the overseer's eyes, silent. Calhoun smirked. "That's the look. That's the one. You'll give it up before long. They all do." He spurred his horse and rode on, whip cracking the air. When evening fell, the quarters came alive again, hushed and secret. Jemmy slipped into the shadows near the well where Isabella waited. She was slender, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. Her hands smelled faintly of wax and smoke from tending candles in the big house. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "You shouldn't be waiting," Jemmy replied, a half smile tugging at his mouth. Isabella's eyes darted toward the quarters. "If they see us, they won't," he cut in, firm but soft. Her hand trembled as it found his. "You speak like a free man, Jemmy. Like you've forgotten what you are." He leaned closer, voice low. "I haven't forgotten. That's why I speak this way." She swallowed, then reached into her dress, pulling out a scrap of parchment. Faded ink scrawled across it in Spanish. "I cleaned the master's study today," she said. "This letter, it speaks of Florida. The Spanish offer land, freedom, sanctuary for any slave who can escape there." Jemmy stared at the letter, the words foreign but sharp, the promise undeniable. He traced the letters with his finger, lips shaping sounds silently. Isabella blinked in shock. You can read?" He nodded once, secret exposed. "Enough to know they fear what we might learn." Her eyes widened, admiration mixing with dread. "Then you must hide this. Hide it where no one can see." From the dark, a shuffle of feet interrupted them. A figure emerged. Elias Morton, another slave, thin and wiry, his posture slouched as though always ready to bow. His eyes were small, restless, and too quick to look away. "You two," Elias muttered, voice sharp with suspicion. "You're playing a dangerous game." Jemmy's grip on Isabella's hand tightened. "Go back to your hut, Elias." Elias tilted his head, lips twitching. "Maybe I will. Or maybe I'll tell Master Calhoun what you're hiding. He rewards loyalty. Better than risking a lash." Jemmy stepped forward, his shadow swallowing Elias. "If you ever speak my name to him, you'll choke on it." The silence stretched, only the chirp of crickets filling the air. Elias backed away, but his smirk lingered. "We'll see who chokes first." When he was gone, Isabella's breath shuddered. "He'll betray you." "Then let him," Jemmy said. "I have nothing left to lose." But Mama Nancy's lullabies drifted through the night again. A reminder that there was always more to lose. Blood, kin, hope itself. The next day, in the fields, Jemmy worked beside Cuffy, sweat pouring down their faces. Cuffy leaned close. Elias watches you like a hawk. He thinks he's clever. He's not clever, Jemmy muttered. He's afraid. Afraid men can be the deadliest, Cuffy warned. At sundown, Jemmy returned to the quarters to find Isabella kneeling in the dirt, whispering prayers. Latin words spilled from her lips, unfamiliar but melodic. "What do you say?" he asked. She looked up, eyes soft. "Words of forgiveness." Jemmy's jaw tightened. "Forgiveness is for those who repent. And if none repent?" she asked. He turned away, the scars on his back catching the firelight. "Then fire will be their absolution." The air in the quarters was heavy, charged with secrets, betrayals waiting to bloom. Elias watched from shadows, whispering to himself like a man bargaining with unseen masters. Isabella clung to her prayers, torn between faith and fury. And Jemmy, tall and silent, carried the weight of both love and vengeance in his chest. The rice fields lay quiet under the stars, but beneath the silence something stirred. The chains were beginning to rust. The morning sun burned hot, the sky a pitiless blue. The slaves gathered in the yard, sweat clinging to their brows though the day had barely begun. Overseers barked orders, horses stamping, whips dangling at their sides like snakes eager to strike. At the center of the yard stood Thomas Calhoun, whiskey bottle already dangling from his hand. His eyes gleamed with the cruel light of entertainment. Before him, a boy no older than 13 trembled, his ribs sharp beneath his skin. Calhoun's voice slurred but cut through the air. This one thought he could pocket rice. A thief, and what happens to thieves? The crowd was silent. No one dared answer. Calhoun swung the whip in a wide arc, the leather cracking like thunder. The boy cried out, falling to his knees, Jemmy's fists clenched at his sides. Cuffy whispered, urgent. "Don't move. Don't even breathe," Calhoun sneered, circling the boy like a vulture. "Look at him, look!" His gaze turned to Jemmy, sharp as a blade. "Lift your head, Angola. You'll watch every strike. You'll watch until your eyes bleed." The whip fell again. Blood splattered the dirt. Mama Nancy's voice, cracked and shaking, broke the silence. "Enough, he's just a child." Calhoun whirled toward her, laugh bitter. "A child? He's property. And property must be marked when it fails." The whip rose again. The boy collapsed forward, chest heaving, breath shallow. One last strike and he lay still, silent. The yard was silent too. Only the buzz of flies filled the air. Calhoun spat into the dirt. "That's what comes of defiance. Remember it." He tossed the whip to an overseer and staggered away, drinking deep from his bottle. Jemmy's eyes never left the boy's still body. His voice, low and steady, carried like a spark. "Before harvest," he whispered, just loud enough for Cuffy to hear, "there will be fire." Cuffy swallowed hard. "And blood." Jemmy's gaze was fixed, unblinking. "Yes, and blood." From the edge of the crowd, Elias Morton watched, lips curled in a faint smile. He leaned close to another worker, muttering just loud enough to be overheard. "Reckon the overseer would reward a man who warns him of rebellion. Maybe freedom, maybe coin." The words slithered through the air like poison. Mama Nancy caught them, her eyes narrowing. "Be careful, boy," she hissed. "You're selling your soul." Elias chuckled, teeth flashing. "A soul won't buy bread, but a master's coin will." That night the quarters were heavy with grief. The boy's absence pressed on every silence. Mothers wept quietly. Children huddled close. Jemmy sat apart, firelight dancing across his scars. Isabella approached, kneeling beside him. Her voice was soft, trembling. "You can't fight them all." "I don't need to fight them all," Jemmy said, voice low, dangerous. "I just need to strike once. Hard enough to make them bleed fear." Isabella touched his hand. "Fear burns out. It never lasts." "Then let it burn bright enough," Jemmy replied, eyes locked on the flames, "to scorch the memory into their bones." Cuffy came near, whispering, "The men listen to you. They'll follow." "But Elias, he'll betray us." Jemmy's eyes hardened. Then we move faster than his tongue. The fire popped, sparks flying into the dark. Mama Nancy began to sing, her voice weary but steady. The lullaby twisted into something new, less comfort, more warning. "Sleep, little bird, for dawn will wake with fire." The boy's death had not just scarred the yard, it had broken the silence, and silence, once broken, could never be repaired. The night after the boy's death, the quarters hummed with restless whispers. No one slept. Every creak of wood, every rustle of leaves outside the thin wall sent hearts racing. The silence that had once smothered them was gone, replaced by something sharper. Resolve. Jemmy sat at the center of the room, the dim glow of a single candle flickering across his face. Around him gathered Cuffy, Isabella, Mama Nancy, and half a dozen others. Their eyes darted to the door, afraid of ears pressed against it. Jemmy spoke low. "We strike on the feast day, while the masters drink, while their guard is weak. We move south, gathering others. The river will guide us." Cuffy nodded but leaned forward, voice trembling. "And if Elias speaks before then?" A hush fell. All eyes turned to the corner where Elias leaned casually, carving at a piece of wood with a dull knife. He smirked, unbothered. "I haven't said a word," Elias muttered. "Not yet." Mama Nancy's cane struck the floor sharply. "Not yet is the cry of the serpent before it bites." Elias's grin widened, but his eyes flickered with unease. Jemmy's voice cut through the tension. "Betrayal has a price, and I promise you, Elias, you cannot pay it." The others shifted, murmurs filling the air. The weight of Jemmy's words settled heavy. Elias said nothing more, but his smirk lingered. The days that followed were a dance with danger. Tools were hidden beneath hay, chains tested for weakness. Cuffy whispered prayers while sharpening blades stolen from the smithy. Isabella, quiet and steady, smuggled scraps of food and strips of cloth, sewing them into makeshift sacks for the march south. Mama Nancy moved among the quarters, her cane tapping like a drumbeat of warning. To the elders, she sang of courage. To the children, she spoke of rivers carrying them to freedom. To Jemmy, she whispered of ancestors who walked beside him unseen but unbroken. Each night they rehearsed in silence. Hands mimed the motions of striking, binding, fleeing. Each rustle in the trees outside brought their practice to a halt. One night, as the plan neared its final form, the sound of boots echoed outside. Overseers laughing, stumbling drunkenly back from town. The conspirators froze. The candle flickered dangerously. A heavy hand pounded on the door. "What's this?" "Still awake, are you?" A voice slurred. Jemmy rose, face calm though his heart thundered. He opened the door slowly, bowing low. "The children could not sleep, master. Too hot tonight." The overseer's eyes swept the room, lingering on the faces, the candle, the tense stillness. For a moment, the whole plot teetered on the edge of ruin. Then the man belched, spat on the ground, and waved his hand. "Snuff it out. Sleep or you'll feel the whip." The door slammed shut. The candle's flame was pinched, plunging the room into darkness. In the black silence, Jemmy's whisper carried like steel. "We are ready." The sun had barely begun to bleed across the horizon when the church bell rang. It was the feast day. The air smelled of wet earth and rotting grain, heavy with humidity. A mist clung low over the fields, muting sound, turning every shape into a shadow. Jemmy walked at the front, tall and unflinching, a musket slung across his shoulder. Behind him, Cuffy carried an axe wrapped in rags to dull its shine. Isabella, her hair tied back, held a small pouch of powder and flint. Mama Nancy leaned on her cane, her eyes fierce, humming the same lullaby she had sung to children for years. Now a battle hymn. The rebels moved as one, silent except for the shuffle of bare feet on the dirt road. Ahead, the Stono River glimmered faintly, a silver vein in the dawn light. To the right, the first target, a storehouse of guns and powder. Jemmy's fist shot up. They halted. He turned, eyes sweeping across the faces, fear, fire, resolve. "Today," he said, voice carrying low but sharp, "we are no man's property. Today, chains break." Cuffy raised his axe, whispering, "Let them hear." They surged forward. The door to the storehouse splintered under the force of their strike. Inside, barrels of gunpowder, racks of muskets. Two keepers dozed in the corner until steel met flesh. Their screams ripped the silence apart, echoing into the trees. Blood sprayed across the walls. The muskets were seized, powder stuffed into sacks. The rebels, once barehanded, now bristled with weapons. And then Jemmy shouted, voice fierce, ragged, "Liberty!" The cry tore through the fields like thunder. It was not English, not the language of the masters, and it was the cry of Angola, of Africa. Liberty! They echoed, a storm of voices. They marched, growing louder, stronger. Smoke rose from the next plantation before the overseer's boots hit the ground. Men were cut down, throats slashed, skulls shattered by axe and blade. Women screamed. Children ran. The rebels left flames behind, but spared some. The enslaved who would not fight, the innocent who cowered. With every mile, more joined. 40 strong, 50. They were no longer whispers in the dark. They were an army, The march was not without blood of their own. At one farmhouse, a master fired from the roof, powder smoke curling like a serpent. His shot tore through a rebel's chest, the man collapsing into the dirt. Isabella screamed, dragging him aside, blood soaking her hands. Jemmy stormed the door, his musket booming like judgment. The master fell, his body crashing through the balcony. "Bury him later," Jemmy commanded, eyes hard. "We move." Mama Nancy's voice rose above the smoke and fire, chanting words older than the soil beneath them. Each syllable was rhythm, each rhythm a drumbeat. The rebels followed her voice as much as Jemmy's command, but the alarm had spread. From the north, militia gathered, armed and mounted. The hunters were coming. The rebels reached a crossroads. South led to the river, and beyond it, Spanish Florida. Freedom whispered in that direction. North meant confrontation. Cuffy spat into the dirt. "We'll never reach the river if they catch us in the open." Elias, smirking as ever, muttered, "Then perhaps we shouldn't run at all." Jemmy's glare silenced him. "We fight," Jemmy declared. "But we fight moving. Every step south drips with their blood." The decision was made. By midday, the rebellion blazed across the countryside. Plantations smoldered, their smoke-black scars against the blue sky. Bells rang, dogs barked, guns cracked. Mothers pulled children into cellars. Masters clutched rifles with trembling hands. On the edge of a field, militia riders appeared. 30 strong, muskets gleaming, hooves pounding like thunder. Jemmy raised his musket. "Hold!" The rebels crouched, ready. The riders closed in, faces twisted with fury. "Now!" Jemmy roared. Gunfire erupted. Smoke blinded the road. Horses screamed, throwing riders to the dirt. Cuffy's axe split a skull. Isabella fired point blank into a chest. Blood sprayed across the stalks of corn, but the militia pressed harder. More came. The field became a furnace of chaos, muskets cracking, blades flashing, men grappling in the mud. Jemmy swung his weapon like a hammer, shattering bone. Mama Nancy stood on a mound, her voice cutting through the screams. "Chains break! Chains burn!" Bodies littered the ground, rebel and master alike. The air stank of powder and iron. By dusk, the rebels had thinned. Some fled into the swamps. Others lay dead in the fields, their blood soaking the soil they had once tilled. Jemmy stood at the center, chest heaving, eyes burning. Cuffy beside him, blood dripping from his axe. Isabella clutching her shoulder, wounded but unbroken. The road south still stretched before them, but the militia was closing fast, dozens more hungry for vengeance. Jemmy lifted his musket, pointing it at the horizon. His voice was hoarse, raw. "We are not done. Not tonight. Not ever." The last of the rebels shouted back, voices hoarse, ragged but alive. "Liberty!" Their cry mingled with the smoke and the coming dark, and the land itself seemed to tremble. The battlefield lay still by dawn. Smoke curled from the scorched earth, mingling with the sweet rot of blood. Crows descended in flocks, their wings beating a grim hymn. Where shouts of liberty had thundered, now only silence pressed heavy over the land. Jemmy staggered through the ruin, eyes burning, his musket little more than splintered wood. Around him lay the broken bodies of his comrades. Cuffy sat hunched, bloodied but alive, his axe dull from bone and earth. Isabella leaned against a tree, her dress torn, clutching her wound, lips moving in prayer. Mama Nancy's voice had finally gone quiet, her body lying on her side. Her cane snapped beside her. Then came the sound. Hooves. The militia descended like a storm. Dozens of riders, muskets raised, their faces grim with vengeance. They rode among the corpses, kicking bodies, striking at the wounded with the butts of their rifles. "Alive!" their captain barked. "Bring them alive if they can walk." Jemmy stood tall, though his legs trembled, his eyes fixed on the captain, a man with silver hair and a scar carved deep across his cheek. "You can chain me," Jemmy said, voice hoarse but unyielding. "But you cannot chain the fire you lit," the captain sneered. "Fire can be drowned, and men can be broken." They bound him in irons thick as serpents and dragged him north. Cuffy spat in the dirt, struggling until the butt of a musket cracked his jaw. Isabella fainted as they forced her onto a horse. Behind them, the militia set torches to the bodies. Flames devoured flesh, turning comrades into ash. The sky turned black once more. In Charleston, the trials began. The courthouse stood white against the sun, its columns casting long shadows that stretched like gallows. Inside, the air was thick with whispers, the rustle of paper, the scrape of chairs. Enslavers packed the benches, eyes gleaming with a hunger for spectacle. Jemmy was dragged in first. Chains clinked with each step, iron biting his wrists. He held his head high, though his body bore the wounds of battle. The magistrate squinted down at him, voice dripping disdain. "You led blood against blood. Masters slain, homes burned, children orphaned. Do you deny it?" Jemmy's lips curled into the faintest smile. "I do not deny, I declare." His voice rose, carrying across the chamber. "We were men before you stole us. We are men still. Better to die free than live bound." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman hissed, clutching her pearls. An overseer spat onto the floor. The magistrate slammed his gavel. "Silence." His tongue drips poison. He will hang, and his words will rot with him. But Jemmy's words did not rot. They echoed, carried by whispers, servants overhearing, children repeating them in the night. Cuffy was brought next. His jaw swollen, his eyes wild with fury. The magistrate leaned forward. "Confess, and perhaps you may find mercy." Cuffy spat blood onto the floor. "Mercy?" His laugh was broken, bitter. "Where was mercy when they whipped me raw for stealing bread? Where was mercy when they sold my brother south? Keep your mercy. I'll keep my soul." He was sentenced to death. Isabella was not granted trial. Her wound festered, and she was dragged from her cell, executed quietly behind the courthouse wall. Witnesses said she sang as the rope tightened. A lullaby, the same she once sang to the children on the plantation. Mama Nancy's body, recovered from the battlefield, was burned at the crossroads, her ashes scattered to cleanse the soil. But her name lingered in whispers, the children humming her songs long after. The executions were made public. On the edge of the city, gallows loomed against the sky. The crowd gathered, sweating in the heat, voices buzzing like flies. Jemmy stood at the center, chains rattling, the noose waiting above him. He scanned the sea of faces, some jeering, some silent, a few averting their eyes. Among them, Elias, the one with the serpent smile who had vanished during the final clash. His clothes were clean, his face smug. A traitor's reward gleamed in his eyes. Jemmy fixed him with a stare sharp as a blade. "You sold us," Elias smirked. "I survived." Cuffy snarled, straining against his bonds, but soldiers held him firm. The magistrate raised his hand. "Let this be warning. Rebellion breeds only death." The noose slipped over Jemmy's neck, but Jemmy's voice thundered one last time, louder than any gavel, sharper than any sword. "Liberty!" The word echoed as the trapdoor fell. His body swung, but the cry hung heavier in the air than his corpse. The crowd went silent. Even the jeerers did not speak. In the weeks that followed, the crackdown grew merciless. Dozens of suspected rebels, men, women, even children, were interrogated, whipped, broken. Some confessed. Others stayed silent, their eyes burning with defiance until their last breath. The militia patrolled day and night, muskets at the ready, dogs unleashed at the faintest whisper of rebellion. Elias strutted freely, rewarded with coin and drink, though whispers clung to him like rot. Even those who shared his skin turned from him, calling him serpent, Judas. He drowned his nights in whiskey, but the word liberty haunted his dreams, echoing until his sleep broke into sweat. But the land remembered. The burned fields bore scars. The ash of rebels mixed with soil, their blood feeding the roots of the very crops that had once chained them. In the cabins of the enslaved, in hushed voices over dying fires, the story was told again and again. They fought. Mothers whispered to children. They bled so we might breathe freer. Chains rattled still, but within those rattles was rhythm, the beat of drums, the echo of defiance. The rebellion was crushed. The masters lived on, but something had shifted, something no gallows or fire could erase. For when Jemmy swung, it was not his body the people remembered, it was his word, liberty. The gallows rotted away. The overseers changed. The fields yielded new harvests. But the memory of Stono refused to die. Not in the court records, where scribes inked the rebellion as barbarous, savage, ungrateful. Not in the sermons, where ministers thundered that obedience was God's will. It lived elsewhere. In the night songs, hummed low so masters could not hear. In the carvings on cabin walls, chains scratched into wood, then broken apart with a crude knife. In the lullabies mothers sang to their children, weaving names like Jemmy, Isabella, and Mama Nancy into the rhythm of sleep. They rose, the mothers whispered, and so must you. The rebellion spread not just through words but through silence. Each hush around a fire, each nod across a field was its own kind of vow. The fire of Stono had not been drowned. It had scattered like embers waiting for wind, and wind came. A generation later, uprisings flickered again, in Georgia, in Virginia, in the islands of the Caribbean. Some failed, some bled into the earth, but each carried a trace of Stono, as though the cry of liberty had embedded itself into the very soil of the South. The masters tried to erase it. Laws tightened. The Negro Act of 1740 was passed, banning literacy, restricting movement, silencing drums. But the very need for such laws betrayed the truth. They feared what had already been born, because Jemmy's word was not just a cry. It had become a ghost whispering across plantations, lingering at the edge of every whip crack, every auction block, every prayer. Even white chroniclers could not help but tell the tale. Though they wrote it twisted, they framed it as savagery, as madness. Yet their words carried the proof of fear, that a handful of men and women, barefoot and chained, could shake an empire. And in time, historians would find those records. Writers would dig through the yellowed pages, and they would see beneath the scorn the truth, that slaves had not been passive. They had not simply bowed. They had risen again and again, against impossible odds. The legend of Jemmy, Cuffy, Isabella, Mama Nancy, and the others survived not in marble monuments or statues, but in whispers, songs, and the stubborn beating of hearts. Their rebellion was not the end. It was the beginning of a story still being told. History records victories in ink, defeats in silence. But silence does not mean nothing happened. The Stono Rebellion was not merely a failed revolt. It was proof. Proof that beneath the chains there was always fire. Jemmy and his companions did not live to see freedom. They did not cross the river. They did not reach Spanish Florida. But they carved something greater than escape. They carved memory. Oppression thrives on the belief that nothing can change. Jemmy shattered that belief. He showed that even in the darkest hour, men and women who have been stripped of everything can still rise, can still terrify those who call themselves masters. The rebellion asks us a question across centuries. What is freedom worth? Is it worth blood? Is it worth risking the lives of those you love? Is it worth certain death so that others might hear your cry and carry it forward? The men and women of Stono answered with their lives, and in that answer lies a truth that history cannot bury. Chains break, but courage remains. Their story lingers not because they succeeded, but because they dared. And in daring, they left a scar on the conscience of a nation. The story of Jemmy and the Stono Rebellion is not just about the past. It is about the present, about power, resistance, and the price of liberty. They stood with nothing but courage against muskets and gallows. They fell, but their cry still echoes. So I ask you, if you lived in their world, bound by chains, would you endure? Or would you rise? Would you forgive? Or would you burn it all down? This is not just history. It is a mirror. And sometimes the mirror asks questions we cannot answer easily, but we must try. Because silence is complicity, and forgetting is surrender. If this story gripped you, if the cry of liberty shook you even for a moment, then do not let it vanish. Keep it alive, share this story. Discuss it. Carry their names on your tongue, so they are never erased again. And if you want more untold histories of blood, betrayal, and defiance, subscribe, like, and join me for the next chapter of our dark past, because history is not dead. It lives in us, and we must decide what to do with it. You've been watching The Slave Resistance, where forgotten chains rattle again, and the untold rebellions of the past rise to speak. Until next time, remember, history never sleeps.